Marcus Henderson stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The dating profile staring back at him belonged to someone who lived in a world he could only dream of. Penthouses, private jets, and a net worth that could fund small countries. But according to the app's algorithm, they were a 99.7% compatibility match. The problem? Marcus delivered pizzas for a living and had exactly $47 in his checking account. Something had gone very, very wrong with the app's matching system. Or maybe, for the first time in his life, something had gone very, very right. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a paper towel and slumped against the brick wall behind Romano's Pizza. His red Honda Civic, with its cracked windshield and duct-taped bumper, sat in the employee parking lot like a monument to his current life situation. At 26, he'd imagined he'd be somewhere different by now. Somewhere that didn't smell permanently of pepperoni and involved apologizing to customers when their orders arrived cold because his car's heater had broken down again. His phone buzzed against his leg. Another notification from HeartSync, the dating app his coworker Danny had practically forced him to download 3 weeks ago. Marcus had resisted at first. Dating apps felt like shopping for people, and he'd never been good at selling himself. But after another Friday night spent watching Netflix, alone in his studio apartment, he'd finally caved. The results had been predictably disappointing. His profile featured a single photo Danny had taken of him during their lunch break, wearing his pizza delivery uniform because it was literally the only clean shirt he owned that day. His bio was painfully honest. Pizza delivery guy who reads philosophy books and fixes old computers, looking for someone real. Not exactly the kind of thing that made profiles go viral. For 3 weeks, HeartSync had shown him a parade of profiles that felt completely out of reach. College graduates with stable careers, women who posted photos from European vacations he couldn't afford to dream about, professionals who used words like networking and synergy in their bios. His few matches had led to conversations that fizzled out the moment they asked what he did for work. But this notification felt different somehow. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the app, expecting another generic match with someone who would ghost him within 24 hours. Instead, his screen exploded with confetti animations and celebratory music loud enough to make him frantically lower the volume. "Perfect match found," the screen declared in bold letters. 9.7% compatibility. Your soulmate awaits. Marcus rolled his eyes. The app's marketing team clearly had no understanding of subtlety. But curiosity got the better of him, and he tapped through to see his supposed soulmate. The first photo nearly made him drop his phone. A woman with striking green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in an elegant updo stared back at him from what appeared to be a charity gala. She wore a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars sparkled at her throat. Behind her, he could make out other formally dressed people, the kind who appeared in magazine spreads about high society events. He swiped to the next photo. She was standing next to a sleek black helicopter, wind catching her hair, wearing jeans that somehow looked more expensive than most people's formal wear. The third photo showed her in what appeared to be a corporate boardroom, commanding attention from a table full of serious-looking executives in expensive suits. Marcus's thumb hesitated over her profile details. Alexandra Sterling, 28, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. The company name sounded vaguely familiar, and when he tapped on it, his eyes widened. Sterling Dynamics was a tech conglomerate he'd seen featured in business magazines at the library, the kind of company that developed cutting-edge software and had offices in 12 countries. According to the brief bio that popped up, Alexandra had inherited the company from her father and had tripled its value in just 4 years. Her dating profile was refreshingly simple compared to the corporate information. Building the future by day, searching for someone who sees the world differently by night. Love deep conversations, old books, and people who aren't afraid to challenge conventional thinking. Not interested in status seekers or fortune hunters, looking for genuine connection. Marcus stared at the screen, trying to process what he was seeing. This had to be some kind of mistake. Apps like HeartSync used complex algorithms based on interests, values, and lifestyle compatibility. There was no universe in which a billionaire CEO and a pizza delivery guy should be flagged as perfect matches, regardless of what books they both happened to enjoy. He scrolled down to see their compatibility breakdown. Intellectual compatibility, 98%. Emotional compatibility, 99%. Lifestyle compatibility, 97%. The numbers made no sense. Marcus lived in a 400-square-foot studio apartment with a Murphy bed and a mini-fridge. Alexandra probably had walk-in closets larger than his entire living space. But as he read through her extended profile answers, something strange began to happen. Her responses to questions about life philosophy, favorite books, and ideal conversations could have been written by someone who understood exactly how Marcus saw the world. She quoted Thoreau and mentioned finding peace in simple moments. She talked about feeling disconnected from superficial social circles and craving authentic relationships. She even mentioned enjoying quiet nights with good books over elaborate social events. Marcus found himself reading her answers twice, then 3 times. Either this was an elaborate catfish situation, or there was something genuinely intriguing about Alexandra Sterling that didn't fit the typical billionaire CEO stereotype. His phone buzzed with another notification. Alexandra had already viewed his profile and sent him a message. Marcus, I have to admit, when the app told me I had a 99.7% match, I was skeptical. But after reading your profile, I'm genuinely curious. Your bio mentions philosophy books. What are you reading lately? Also, I have to ask, is it true that pizza delivery gives you unique insights into human nature? Aide, Alex. Marcus read the message 4 times, each time expecting it to disappear or reveal itself as some kind of elaborate prank. But there it was, a genuine-seeming message from someone who lived in a completely different stratosphere, asking about his thoughts on philosophy and his observations about human nature. He started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. How do you respond to a billionaire who wants to discuss Kant and pizza delivery sociology? Every possible reply felt either too casual or too formal, too eager or too aloof. Finally, he settled on honesty, currently working through Camus and questioning whether the absurd nature of existence includes getting perfectly matched with someone who lives in a different universe than I do. As for pizza delivery insights, you'd be amazed what people reveal about themselves when they think you're invisible. I'm still trying to figure out if this is real, or if the app's algorithm has achieved consciousness and decided to play matchmaker with impossible odds. Marcus. He hit send before he could overthink it further, then immediately regretted the philosophical reference and the hint of skepticism. But within minutes, his phone buzzed again. Camus, I knew there was a reason the algorithm flagged you. The absurd is exactly what makes life interesting. And I suspect you're far from invisible. People just don't know how to see clearly. The app's algorithm didn't achieve consciousness, but maybe it saw something we're both missing. Question: what's the most unexpectedly profound conversation you've had during a pizza delivery? I have a theory that real wisdom often comes from unexpected places. Alex. Marcus stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maybe the algorithm hadn't malfunctioned after all. Maybe it had simply seen past the obvious incompatibilities to something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with bank accounts or zip codes and everything to do with how 2 people thought about the world. His shift supervisor called his name from inside the restaurant, signaling the end of his break. Marcus pocketed his phone and headed back to work, but for the first time in months, he found himself looking forward to continuing a conversation, even if it was with someone who lived in a world he'd never imagined entering. Over the next 3 days, Marcus found himself living in 2 completely different worlds. During his shifts at Romano's, he navigated familiar territory, complaining customers, broken ovens, and the eternal struggle to make rent on time. But every spare moment was consumed by conversations with Alexandra that felt like discovering a hidden dimension of reality. Their text exchanges had evolved from cautious philosophical probing to genuine intellectual sparring matches. Alexandra challenged his interpretations of existentialist writers, while Marcus offered perspectives on economic inequality that came from lived experience rather than academic theory. She shared stories about the isolation of wealth and corporate responsibility. He described the strange intimacy of seeing people at their most unguarded moments during food deliveries. What surprised Marcus most wasn't Alexandra's intelligence or thoughtfulness. Her profile had hinted at both. It was her genuine curiosity about his world and her apparent lack of condescension. When he mentioned fixing computers as a side hustle, she didn't treat it as a quaint hobby, but asked detailed technical questions that revealed her own programming background. When he described his neighborhood, she listened without judgment and asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually processing what he shared. Thursday evening, while Marcus was replacing a customer's broken laptop screen at his kitchen table, his phone rang instead of buzzing with a text notification. Alexandra's name appeared on the screen, accompanied by a small photo that still looked surreal next to his contact list of pizza shop coworkers and his landlord. "I hope you don't mind me calling." Alexandra's voice was warmer than he'd expected, with a slight rasp that made her sound more approachable than her corporate photos suggested. "I was stuck in traffic after a board meeting, and texting seemed inadequate for the conversation I wanted to have." Marcus set down his screwdriver and cleared his throat. "Not at all. Though I should warn you, I'm currently performing surgery on a laptop that someone's kid used as a skateboard ramp." Alexandra laughed, a genuine sound that carried no trace of polite social filtering. A casualty of creative parenting. Will it survive? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The laptop or the parent-child relationship. Marcus found himself relaxing into the conversation. "The laptop will be fine. The trust issues might take longer to heal." "You know," Alexandra said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about invisible labor and how society assigns value. I spent 2 hours in a meeting today, where 6 people with advanced degrees couldn't solve a logistics problem that I bet you encounter and resolve every single day." "Pizza delivery logistics are surprisingly complex," Marcus agreed, threading a new screen cable through the laptop's housing. "Most people think it's just driving from point A to point B, but there's route optimization, thermal management for food quality, customer psychology, time management under pressure. It's basically operations research with a minimum wage salary." "Exactly," Alexandra's enthusiasm carried clearly through the phone. "But society sees you as replaceable because the barriers to entry are low, while it sees my board members as invaluable because they have expensive credentials. The actual skill and intelligence required don't factor into the equation." Marcus paused his repair work. Most people, when he explained the complexities of his job, either dismissed him or offered empty platitudes about honest work. Alexandra was engaging with his ideas as if they mattered, as if his insights carried weight equal to her own. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, suddenly needing to address the elephant that had been lurking in every conversation. "I looked up sterling dynamics after we matched. Your company is worth more than the GDP of some countries. This whole situation feels like a glitch in the matrix." "Would it help if I told you I've been feeling the same way?" Alexandra's voice carried a note of vulnerability he hadn't heard before. "Do you know what my last relationship was like? 3 months with someone who texted me exclusively about stock prices and used our dinner conversations to pitch me investment opportunities. Before that, a guy who seemed normal, until I realized he was taking photos of my apartment to show his friends. I've learned to assume that anyone interested in dating me is actually interested in dating my portfolio." Quote. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared experience despite their vastly different circumstances. "I know what you mean, though from the opposite direction. Most women lose interest the moment they realize I'm not going anywhere fast career-wise. There's this moment in every conversation where I can see them doing mental math about my earning potential and deciding I don't add up to their expectations." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Alexandra said. "We're both being evaluated by external metrics instead of who we actually are. The algorithm didn't make a mistake. It ignored the noise and focused on compatibility factors that actually matter." Marcus secured the laptop's new screen and powered it on, watching the display come to life with satisfying brightness. "So what happens now?" "Because I have to be honest with you, Alex. I can't afford to take you to the kinds of places you're probably used to. My idea of a nice dinner involves checking if I have enough left over after rent to order something that isn't pizza." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to worry he'd finally hit the wall where reality crashed into whatever fantasy they'd been building. When Alexandra finally spoke, her voice was quieter but more determined. "Marcus, can I ask you something? What would you want to do on a perfect date? If money wasn't a factor at all?" Marcus considered the question, setting aside his automatic responses about what he couldn't afford. "Honestly, I'd want to go somewhere we could actually talk. Maybe a bookstore with a coffee shop. Or that museum downtown that has the philosophy exhibit. Somewhere we could walk around, look at things together, have real conversations without feeling like we're performing for anyone else. The Whitman Museum, Alexandra said immediately. They have a new exhibit on the intersection of technology and human consciousness. I've been wanting to see it, but everyone I know would either find it boring or use it as background noise for networking. You know about the Whitman Museum? Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. I volunteer there sometimes, helping with their computer systems. Most people in this city don't even know it exists. I drive past it every day on my way to work, Alexandra admitted. I've always wanted to go, but I worried about being recognized and having it turn into a business interaction instead of just enjoying the exhibits. Quote, Marcus felt a sudden surge of bold certainty. What if we went together this Saturday afternoon? I know all the quiet spots where we could actually look at things without interruption. And I promise, the only agenda I have is getting to know you better. You're sure you want to risk being seen in public with someone who might attract attention? Alex, Marcus said, surprising himself with his own confidence. I've spent 3 days talking to someone who thinks my thoughts are worth hearing and my opinions matter. If you're willing to be seen with a guy who shows up in a 10-year-old Honda with tape holding the bumper on, then I think we can navigate whatever attention comes our way. The pause this time felt different. Not hesitant, but considering. Saturday at 2? Alexandra's voice carried a note of excitement that made Marcus smile. Fair warning, though. I haven't been on a real date in over a year. I might be rusty at the whole normal human interaction thing. Good thing I specialize in figuring out what people need, Marcus replied. See you Saturday, Alex. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his kitchen staring at the repaired laptop, but his mind was entirely focused on the fact that he had somehow managed to ask out a billionaire CEO for a museum date. The absurdity of it should have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Saturday arrived with an unseasonably warm October afternoon that made Marcus question every clothing choice he'd made. He'd borrowed a button-down shirt from Danny, but it hung slightly loose on his frame. His only decent jeans were clean but showed their age, and his sneakers had been scrubbed until they looked presentable if not exactly fashionable. Standing outside the Whitman Museum at 1:55 p.m., Marcus felt the familiar weight of being out of place. The museum steps buzzed with typical weekend activity: families with strollers, college students with oversized coffee cups, elderly couples moving at their own thoughtful pace. Marcus scanned the crowd, looking for auburn hair and green eyes, wondering if Alexandra would arrive in a car that cost more than most people's houses. At exactly 2 o'clock, he spotted her walking up the sidewalk, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore dark jeans that fit perfectly, a cream-colored sweater that looked effortlessly elegant, and simple leather boots that probably cost a fortune but didn't announce it. Her hair was down, catching the afternoon light, and she carried a small crossbody bag instead of the designer handbags he'd expected. She looked beautiful, but more importantly, she looked approachable. Like someone who belonged in his world instead of the corporate boardrooms he'd seen in her photos. When Alexandra spotted him, her face lit up with a smile that seemed completely genuine. "Marcus," she said as she approached, and the way she said his name made him feel like he was exactly who she'd hoped to see. "You made it," he replied, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "Did you think I'd back out?" Alexandra asked, tilting her head with an expression of curious amusement. "The thought crossed my mind," Marcus admitted. "This whole situation still feels surreal." Alexandra stepped closer, close enough that he could catch a subtle scent of perfume that seemed expensive, but not overwhelming. "Can I tell you a secret? I've been nervous all morning. I changed clothes 3 times trying to find something that looked normal, instead of like I was heading to a board meeting." The admission made Marcus relax slightly. "You chose well. You look like someone I might actually have a chance with." "You always had a chance," Alexandra said quietly, meeting his eyes directly. "That's what made this worth pursuing." They purchased tickets and entered the museum's main gallery, where the Technology and Consciousness exhibit occupied a series of interconnected rooms. Marcus had seen parts of it during his volunteer shifts, but experiencing it with Alexandra felt entirely different. She moved through the displays with genuine curiosity, reading every placard and asking questions that showed she was processing the information rather than just going through the motions. This is fascinating, Alexandra said, stopping in front of an interactive display about artificial intelligence and human decision-making. It's asking whether algorithms can truly understand human compatibility, or if they're just very sophisticated pattern-matching systems. Marcus joined her at the display, pressing buttons to cycle through different compatibility scenarios. Sounds familiar. Think HeartSync actually understands us, or did it just get lucky with pattern recognition? Alexandra laughed, a sound he was already becoming addicted to hearing. Maybe the question isn't whether it understands us, but whether it helped us understand something about ourselves we weren't seeing clearly. They moved deeper into the exhibit, finding themselves in a quieter section that explored the philosophy of human connection in digital spaces. The lighting was dimmer here, more intimate, and fewer visitors had ventured into this area. Marcus, Alexandra said, stopping beside a display about authentic communication across social barriers. Can I ask you something personal? More personal than discussing existential philosophy with someone whose net worth could fund a small country. Marcus replied, earning another one of those genuine laughs. When you first saw my profile, what did you think? Be honest. Marcus considered his response carefully. I thought there had been a mistake. But then I read your answers, and they sounded like they were written by someone who understood how I see the world. It was confusing, because nothing about our circumstances should have led to that kind of compatibility. Alexandra nodded slowly. I had the same reaction. Everything logical said we were impossible, but everything that actually mattered said we might be perfect. Do you know what convinced me to message you? My devastating good looks and obvious wealth? Marcus suggested with a grin. Your bio, Alexandra said seriously. You described yourself as someone who reads philosophy books and fixes old computers. Most people in my world would list those as contradictions, intellectual pursuits versus manual labor, but you presented them as parts of the same person, someone who thinks deeply and solves practical problems. That combination is incredibly rare. They found themselves in the exhibit's final room, which featured a small seating area surrounded by displays about the future of human connection. The space was empty except for them, creating an unexpected bubble of privacy in the public museum. I need to tell you something, Marcus said, settling onto one of the benches. This is the best date I've been on in years, maybe ever, not because of who you are professionally, but because you're the first person I've met who seems interested in who I actually am. Alexandra sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. That's exactly what I was going to say to you. Do you realize you haven't asked me a single question about my company or my money? You've asked about my thoughts, my experiences, what I find interesting. That's completely unprecedented in my dating experience. Maybe that's why the algorithm matched us, Marcus suggested. It recognized that we're both looking for the same thing. Someone who sees past the surface circumstances to whatever's underneath. Alexandra turned to face him more directly. So what happens now? Because I should probably mention that this afternoon has been perfect, and I'm hoping it's not a one-time occurrence. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but this time it was anticipation rather than nervousness. What happens now is I ask if you'd like to get coffee somewhere quiet, where we can continue this conversation. And then I probably panic about where to take someone like you for a second date. Someone like me? Alexandra raised an eyebrow. Someone brilliant and beautiful who happens to have complicated life circumstances, Marcus clarified. Same as you're dating someone intelligent and interesting who happens to have different complicated life circumstances. Alexandra smiled, reaching over to take his hand. Her fingers were warm, and the gesture felt natural rather than calculated. I know a place that serves excellent coffee and has terrible lighting, so no one will bother us. My treat before you start worrying about finances. Actually, Marcus said, standing and pulling her gently to her feet, I've got this one covered. I may not be able to compete with your usual lifestyle, but I can afford good coffee for someone who's worth it. As they walked back through the museum toward the exit, Marcus caught their reflection in one of the display cases. They looked like a normal couple having a normal date, nothing about their appearance suggesting the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Maybe that was the point. Underneath all the surface differences, they were just two people who had found something rare and worth exploring. Marcus, Alexandra said as they reached the museum steps, I'm glad the app glitched. Me too, Marcus replied, meaning it completely. Though I'm starting to think it wasn't a glitch at all. Maybe it was just the first algorithm smart enough to ignore everything that doesn't actually matter. Walking down the street together toward whatever coffee shop and whatever future awaited them, Marcus realized that sometimes the most impossible matches turn out to be the most perfectly logical ones. The algorithm hadn't made a mistake. It had just seen something that took humans a little longer to recognize. Sometimes the best connections happen not despite our differences, but because of our willingness to look past them to find what actually matters. The coffee shop Alexandra led him to was tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small art gallery, the kind of place that survived on local regulars rather than tourist traffic. The interior was deliberately mismatched. Worn leather armchairs paired with industrial metal tables, exposed brick walls covered in local artwork, and lighting dim enough to create intimate corners throughout the space. It felt like the opposite of every sterile corporate environment Marcus associated with Alexandra's world. "I come here when I need to think," Alexandra explained as they settled into a corner booth that offered privacy from a handful of other customers. "The owner doesn't care who you are as long as you don't monopolize a table during rush hour." Marcus looked around, taking in the eclectic atmosphere. "How did you find this place?" "Pure accident," Alexandra said, flagging down a server with purple hair and multiple ear piercings. "I was having the worst day about 6 months ago. Hostile board meeting, 3 different crises with overseas operations, and my assistant had scheduled back-to-back meetings until 9 p.m. I was driving to another corporate dinner I didn't want to attend when my car broke down 2 blocks from here." "Your car broke down?" Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. "What kind of car?" Alexandra looked slightly embarrassed. "A Tesla Model S. Apparently even expensive cars have computer glitches. I was stranded in a cocktail dress and heels, and this was the closest place that looked like it wouldn't judge me for hiding out until the tow truck arrived." The server approached their table with an easy smile. "Hey, Alex, the usual?" "Actually, make it 2, Alexandra replied. "Marcus, I hope you trust me with your caffeine choices." After the server left, Marcus leaned back in his seat, studying Alexandra's face in the warm lighting. "So you're a regular here. That's not exactly what I expected from your lifestyle." "What did you expect?" Alexandra asked, seeming genuinely curious rather than defensive. Marcus considered his words carefully. "Honestly, I thought you'd only know places where reservations require weeks of advance planning, and the staff treats customers like visiting royalty, places where being seen is part of the point." "Those places exist in my life," Alexandra admitted. "Business dinners, client meetings, social obligations. But they're not where I go when I want to be myself. They're where I go when I need to be the CEO version of myself." Their coffee arrived, elaborate lattes with intricate foam art that seemed almost too beautiful to drink. Marcus took a sip and was surprised by the complexity of flavors, rich and smooth with hints of vanilla and something he couldn't quite identify. "This is incredible," he said, and Alexandra's face lit up with pleasure at his approval. "The owner sources beans directly from farmers in Colombia and Ethiopia. She takes as much pride in her coffee as most people take in their life's work." Alexandra paused, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "It's funny. I've closed multi-million-dollar deals in boardrooms where the coffee came from a machine and tasted like burnt water, but some of my clearest thinking happens in places like this." Marcus found himself studying her expressions, the way her guard seemed to drop completely in this environment. "Can I ask you something that might be too personal?" "After this afternoon, I think we're past worrying about boundaries," Alexandra replied with a smile. "What's the loneliest part of your life?" The question seemed to catch Alexandra off guard, and she was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Success," she said finally. "That probably sounds ridiculous to someone working multiple jobs to make ends meet, but success creates this weird isolation. Every interaction becomes transactional. People want something from you, or they're intimidated by what they think you represent, or they make assumptions about who you must be based on what you've achieved." Marcus nodded slowly. "I think I understand that more than you might expect. Different circumstances, same dynamic. People either dismiss you because of what you do, or they treat you like you're invisible, or they assume they know your whole story based on one piece of information." "Exactly," Alexandra said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "It's like everyone has already decided who you are before you get a chance to show them." The algorithm was the first thing that looked past all those surface markers to focus on something deeper. "Speaking of the algorithm," Marcus said, pulling out his phone, "I've been curious about something. Do you mind if I check our compatibility breakdown again?" Alexandra laughed and retrieved her own phone. I've probably looked at it a dozen times trying to figure out how it came to its conclusions. They placed their phones side by side on the table, scrolling through the detailed compatibility analysis that had brought them together. The breakdown was more extensive than Marcus had initially noticed, covering categories he hadn't seen in other dating app algorithms. "Look at this," Alexandra said, pointing to a section labeled Problem-Solving Approach. It rated us both as, quote, practical idealists, people who think in big-picture terms but focus on actionable solutions. Marcus read the description more carefully. It says we both score high on systemic thinking and, quote, empathetic pragmatism. I'm not even sure what that means, but it sounds accurate. "Here's something interesting," Alexandra said, scrolling to another section. Communication style compatibility, 96%. It says we both prefer direct honesty with emotional intelligence and avoid performative social interaction. Performative social interaction, Marcus repeated. That's exactly what most dating feels like everyone's auditioning for a role instead of just being themselves. They continued exploring the compatibility breakdown, discovering that the algorithm had analyzed everything from their responses about ideal conflict resolution to their attitudes toward money and status. The more they read, the more impressed Marcus became with the sophistication of the analysis. "This is actually incredible," he said. "It's not just matching based on interests or demographics. It's analyzing psychological compatibility, communication patterns, life philosophy, and even preferred emotional dynamics." Alexandra looked up from her phone with an expression of dawning realization. "Marcus, what if this wasn't a glitch at all? What if we've been thinking about compatibility all wrong?" "What do you mean?" "Society tells us that compatibility is about similar backgrounds, income levels, social status, and shared cultural experiences. But what if those things are actually less important than we think? What if real compatibility is about how your minds work together, how you approach problems, how you communicate when things get difficult?" Marcus felt something click into place. "You're saying the algorithm ignored all the obvious incompatibilities because it found deeper compatibility markers that actually matter more for long-term relationships." "Exactly," Alexandra said, her excitement growing. "Think about it. How many relationships fail between people who look perfect together on paper? How many successful marriages involve people from completely different backgrounds who somehow just work together?" Marcus found himself getting caught up in her enthusiasm. So the algorithm was actually more sophisticated than we gave it credit for. It looked past the surface-level mismatch to identify psychological and emotional compatibility. "Which means," Alexandra said, reaching across the table to take his hand again, "that this isn't some impossible fairy tale. It's just two people who happen to think well together, regardless of where we started from." The insight felt revolutionary and obvious at the same time. Marcus looked at their joined hands, his slightly calloused from manual labor, hers softer, but bearing the subtle tension of someone who spent long hours typing and gesturing through presentations. Different hands that somehow fit together perfectly. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "Because I have to be honest. I'm falling for someone who lives in a completely different world than I do, and I have no idea how to navigate that." Alexandra's grip on his hand tightened slightly. "What happens now is we figure it out together. I'm falling for someone too, and his world is actually exactly where I want to be. We just need to build a bridge between them." As the afternoon faded into evening around them, Marcus realized that the most important discovery wasn't that an algorithm had matched them despite their differences. It was that they had found each other across those differences and decided that what they had was worth whatever complications came with it. The technology had simply been smart enough to see what their hearts were ready to discover. "There's something I need to tell you," Alexandra said, her voice taking on a more serious tone as the coffee shop began to fill with the dinner crowd. "I haven't been completely honest about why I was so nervous about today." Marcus felt his stomach tighten slightly. "What do you mean?" Alexandra pulled her phone back out, but this time she navigated to a different app entirely. "I did something I probably shouldn't have done after we first matched. I had my security team run a background check on you." The admission hit Marcus like cold water. "You investigated me?" "Before you get angry, please let me explain," Alexandra said quickly, seeing his expression change. "It's standard procedure for anyone who enters my life in any capacity. I've had situations in the past where people have used personal information to manipulate or exploit me. My team does basic verification on everyone, employees, business contacts, even friends. Marcus leaned back in his seat, processing this information. Part of him felt violated, but another part understood the practical necessity for someone in Alexandra's position. What did you find? Alexandra showed him her phone screen, which displayed what appeared to be a standard background report. Marcus James Henderson, 26, born in Denver, moved to the city 4 years ago. High school graduate, 2 years of community college studying computer science before financial circumstances required him to work full-time. No criminal record, good credit considering his income level, volunteers at the Whitman Museum, and occasionally helps elderly neighbors with technology issues. Sounds about right, Marcus said, still uncertain how to feel about being investigated. But here's what the report couldn't capture, Alexandra continued, setting her phone aside. It couldn't tell me that you chose to help your elderly neighbors because you genuinely care about people who feel left behind by technology. It couldn't explain why you volunteer at a museum instead of spending your free time in ways that might advance your career. It couldn't measure the fact that you've been supporting your younger sister's college expenses even though it means you live in a studio apartment and drive a car held together with tape. Marcus looked up sharply. How do you know about Emma? The financial records showed regular transfers to Colorado State University, Alexandra said gently. But the report just listed them as educational expenses. It took our conversation about family responsibility for me to understand what those transfers actually meant. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions, invasion of privacy, but also recognition that Alexandra had looked deeper than the bare facts. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to understand something, Alexandra said, leaning forward intently. Every piece of information in that report reinforced what the algorithm saw. You're exactly who you presented yourself to be. There were no red flags, no inconsistencies, no hidden agendas, just someone living with integrity despite difficult circumstances. And that surprised you? Alexandra nodded. In my world, authenticity is incredibly rare. Most people I meet have carefully constructed personas designed to impress or manipulate. Finding someone whose private life matches their public presentation exactly, that's almost unheard of. Marcus digested this information slowly. So the background check actually made you more interested, not less. It made me realize that the algorithm had found something genuinely special, Alexandra said. Someone whose character remains consistent whether anyone's watching or not. The server approached their table again, this time to inform them that the evening dinner service was beginning and their table would be needed soon. Alexandra checked her watch and seemed surprised by how much time had passed. I should probably let you get back to your evening, Marcus said, starting to gather his things. Actually, Alexandra said, a hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice, I was hoping you might want to continue this conversation somewhere else. I know this might sound presumptuous, but would you like to see my apartment? I promise it's not what you're expecting. Marcus felt his eyebrows raise. Your apartment? I know how that sounds, Alexandra said quickly, but I want to show you something that might help explain why this connection feels so important to me. And I promise we can keep talking without any pressure or expectations beyond that. Something in her tone convinced Marcus that this wasn't a casual invitation. Okay, he said, but I should probably mention that my idea of impressive living spaces has been calibrated to studio apartments and shared housing. Alexandra smiled as they stood to leave. Trust me, you'll understand when you see it. The drive to Alexandra's building took them through increasingly upscale neighborhoods, past boutique shops and restaurants that Marcus had only seen from the outside. When they pulled into the parking garage of a sleek glass tower, Marcus felt the familiar weight of being out of his element returning. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was quiet, filled with the kind of nervous energy that preceded important revelations. When Alexandra unlocked her door and gestured for him to enter, Marcus braced himself for the kind of luxury showcase he'd seen in magazines. Instead, he found himself in a space that felt surprisingly familiar. The apartment was undeniably expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning city view, and the kitchen featured appliances that probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. But the furniture was comfortable rather than ostentatious, the decorations were personal rather than professionally curated, and books were everywhere. This isn't what I expected, Marcus said, running his hand along a bookshelf that stretched from floor to ceiling. What did you expect? Alexandra asked, watching his reaction carefully. Something that looked like a hotel lobby, Marcus admitted. All marble and gold and furniture you're afraid to sit on. Alexandra laughed, moving to the kitchen to put on a kettle. I have one of those too. The corporate apartment downtown where I host business dinners and impress investors. This is where I actually live. Marcus examined the books more closely, finding philosophy texts mixed with science fiction novels, technical manuals alongside poetry collections. It was the library of someone with genuinely eclectic interests, rather than someone trying to appear intellectual. Marcus, Alexandra called from the kitchen, come look at this. He joined her by the windows where she was pointing toward a building visible in the distance. See that red brick building with the green roof? Third floor, corner unit? Marcus squinted in the direction she indicated. Yeah, I can just make it out. That's your neighborhood, Alexandra said quietly. I can see the general area where you live from my living room window. The revelation sent a strange chill through Marcus. You've been able to see my neighborhood this whole time? Every morning when I have my coffee, I look out that window, Alexandra said. For months I've been staring toward a part of the city I never visit, wondering what life is like for people who live there. And now I know that somewhere in that direction, there was someone who might understand me in ways I never expected. Marcus stood beside her at the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The physical distance between their living situations was measurable in miles, but standing here with her, it felt like no distance at all. The algorithm didn't just match our personalities, he said slowly. It connected two people who were already looking toward each other without knowing it. Alexandra turned to face him fully, and in the soft lighting of her apartment, she looked more beautiful and more approachable than ever. I think I'm falling in love with you, Marcus Henderson. And that terrifies me, because I have no idea how to make this work, but I know I want to try. Marcus felt his heart race as he reached for her hands. I'm already in love with you, Alexandra Sterling. And you're right. I have no idea how to navigate dating someone who lives in a penthouse while I live in a studio, but I've never felt anything like this before, and I'm not ready to let it go. When Alexandra stepped closer and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then, with growing certainty, Marcus realized that some bridges build themselves when two people are willing to meet in the middle. The algorithm had been right after all, not about their circumstances, but about their hearts. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.